You have people coming from Asia who aren't going to sleep at 1 or 2 o'clock in the morning because they want to be out. And so they have worked to try to change not only the safety aspect of nightlife, but also they're working to have the state allow them to operate 24 hours, 7 days a week, and give special licenses to venues that meet high standards of practices to be able to serve the public through all hours of the day. They've changed a number of the regulations, but among the key is their transportation components of the initiative. The first is what they call the night owl service. And this is where there's been an organized public education campaign about the fact that there is some public transit that operates late into the evening, and to encourage people to access it, to use it. They were able to convince the county transportation system to identify certain routes that go between the different districts, the different nightlife districts, to keep them running later, and to have some artery routes that go to the higher concentration of where the nightlife patrons are coming from. So even in tight budgetary times, the transit system has begun to work to more effectively either maximize awareness of the existing service that they have, or readjust the service so that it's more efficiently provided to the people who are in that market, and that they are having the nightlife, the nighttime economy, as a component now of their transit master planning process. So it's been integrated as an agenda item, and that they've worked to improve lighting in some of the transit stops, which is an impediment to many people using public transit, particularly women who are leaving nightlife venues, and so creating better lighting and making these areas more safe is really a part of that public transit system. So that's one transit component. The other is the expansion of taxi stands. They had some, but they've expanded the numbers. They've located them in 5 districts. They've concentrated them in areas with a lot of nightlife activity. They've repainted the curb sides. They're improving the lighting. They're posting signs that tell you this is a cab stand. And they've done promotional branding that says this is a secure stand versus just a taxi stand. So they put that secure in the branding. And you have Taxi Magic, which is a service. You have somebody here who represents that company, that if somebody goes to one of these designated stands and there isn't a cab queued up, there's a way in which to scan a code, and that automatically signals a cab to come to that particular location. And your cab ride would automatically be put on a credit card, so then you don't even have to have cash. So Seattle is removing all of the barriers, or many of the barriers, that people face in accessing taxis at night. And then finally, if I'm going to decide that I've had too much to drink, but I've parked my car on the street, and that at 8 o'clock in the morning the city is going to start writing tickets, then I'm going to make a choice. Do I drive home and risk safety, or do I leave my car and risk a parking fine? And so they created what they call the liquor lock, but it's a way in which after midnight, if I put money in the meter, my car can stay there till 10 o'clock in the morning. And it just doesn't have to be for if I've had too much to drink. It may be that I just happen to meet somebody that I like. And so I can leave my car and pick it up in the morning, you know. So it serves multiple purposes besides just safety. So this is the Seattle example. Calgary is another city that we've worked with, as Karen talked about. And they were working on their city center development plan, a very comprehensive plan of really revitalizing and developing their downtown activity. And their focus was on using CPTED, crime prevention through environmental design, And so we facilitated a transportation group. We had the advocates for taxi, the taxi industry, the transit company, the BRZs, the people who represent the business districts. There was a working partnership that came together and decided that they needed to create a way to remove some of the challenges, because some of these districts where you have the nightlife venues, the streets weren't wide enough for the both transportation of the regular traffic and the lining up of the cabs, and there was no place for the cabs to park. And so you had this conflict of large crowds looking for cabs, but when the cab stopped to pick somebody else, pick somebody up, it blocked the traffic behind them. And so it was a very inefficient way to move people. And there were, again, those public safety issues, their quality of life issues. People were walking out into the street to hail a cab. People were congregating near residential units and disturbing residents because while they were waiting for cabs, people were trying to sleep. So there were a lot of quality of life issues. So they put together 13 late-night ride-home stands. Originally, they were going to use existing transit stops and convert them to taxi queuing stands, but instead they designated certain areas that were in or near the nightclub districts, and they marked off or took over some of the parking space. They posted signs, and that they began to had a training program for the security staff so that the nightlife venue staff could help facilitate people getting to where they needed to get the cabs. They had an aggressive media campaign with TV and radio and print, as well as campaigns within the venues to encourage people to use this. Part of the issue, whenever you have taxi stands, is that nightlife people will park in the designated areas for the taxis, which makes it impossible for the taxis to queue up. So they began with a parking enforcement program, first by issuing tickets, and then coming in and towing illegally parked cars. But they had a promotional, educational campaign that advised people of this new rule. So this has just started recently, but it's a program that is being integrated into a broader transit system. And then finally, you have your own visionary amongst your members who pioneered a project in Brisbane in Queensland. And the loitering that was occurring between 3 and 5 a.m. and the abusive behavior to the drivers and the driver resistance to provide service were all components of the challenges that were part of this active and vibrant nightlife area. So the process was to put together a public-private partnership between the government and the industry, and to begin again, like they did in Seattle, to rebrand the ranks as secure ranks. The emphasis as this is a place to go that's secure. Manchester or other areas in London build kiosks where they have the same kind of facilitated. And I don't know if you have a kiosk, but you have barriers, improved lighting, closed-circuit television. They take over 2 to 3 blocks where the cabs can queue up. They have 2 staff, a person who has 4 to 5 years experience in the taxi industry, who understands routes and rates and protocol for accessing the taxi, and they have 1 or 2 security people who can screen people when they're waiting in line. And if somebody's intoxicated or their behavior seems to be a threat to the drivers, the security people can pull them out of the line and either detain them or call some other kind of resource to deal with those people. And this makes it so that the driver is less resistant to taking the patrons in the nightlife area because you're removing that one barrier. I know in Calgary, I don't know if they did it, but they were talking about a couple of other strategies, one of which was if a person vomits in a cab, it takes the cab out of system. So they were going to set up a cleaning service that the cab could access to clean their car and be provided with a small grant to cover the time in which they were down. The other thing they were talking about in Calgary, I don't know if they did it or not, was to use some parking lots. So instead of having the cab circulate during that period between like 11 when everybody comes and 2 when everybody leaves, they could just queue up like they do at an airport. And the clubs can start calling and saying, you know, we need more cabs. But, you know, this idea of designating that area, queuing people up, having an expediter, having it well lit, are all part of what would be considered more of a public safety strategy. Because the more you can facilitate this process, the fewer conflicts you're going to have with the patrons, the less likelihood you're going to have people fighting over a cab, which means you need fewer police officers. So the cost of police officers in comparison to the cost of this coordinated taxi rank system is far greater. So you choose this as a public safety strategy and use your public safety resources to help facilitate this taxi rank or secure rank system. There's other options, and maybe Blair might comment on these, that would have a flat fare option, or they have a night link that links the taxi with the bus or the taxi with the train, or a taxi, taxi, bus, and trains are all connected. So these are the programs that we highlighted, but there's some common themes that today we still have daytime economy policy and policymakers. They don't go out after 10 o'clock at night. So they don't know that there's a world after 10 o'clock at night. And they don't realize the economic, social, employment activity that exists, that is putting money into the city's coffers, that are making people come to the city for their conventions and their tourism, or the students that are coming to the city because they know there's a nightlife which helps the universities and colleges to hire good faculty, which live in the city, that buy the houses and rent the homes and buy the furniture and the clothes and everything else. And we also talk about the tangential money that's spent on nightlife. Go out and look at what women wear when they go out at night. Certainly not what they wear to the office. And so you have a whole economy that's built around buying clothes and hairstyles and shoes that really is spent during the day, but is for the purposes of night. You have the driver reluctance, the lack of convenient location, the traffic congestion at closing, parking enforcement, lack of resources. These are the common barriers, but I hope in my presentation I showed you how at least these 4 cities work together to overcome these barriers. We have written up case studies. I didn't have them ready for Karen, but in your book is a chapter from our practical guide which looks at the transportation options. But you could contact me or Alicia, and I'll send them off to Karen. But each of these 4 city programs are written up in more detail.